session today is designing rich dashboards, the challenges and best practices. This is the second in our UX series that we're offering. Our presenters today are going to be Raluca, MA, our creative director, and Rahman, a member of our user experience design team. This dynamic duo is going to be discussing the challenges of creating well-designed and efficient dashboards, and is going to share some industry best practices for making the most of your dashboard project. My name is Andrea Simmons, and I'm the marketing director here at INM. I'm going to be your virtual host and available to you throughout the session. So if you have any questions that pop up or any audio or technical issues, you're able to be live at any point during the session through the chat window. As well, we're going to be collecting some questions this morning as we go along. You can feel free to type those in. On the right-hand side of your screen, you've got a questions panel. If that panel is not showing up for you, at the top right corner, you're going to see a little red arrow. You can use expand and collapse your screen in order to be able to interact with us. So feel free as we go along to type in any questions that come to mind, and we'll have some time at the end of the session to address those. The same goes if you have any issues. There's a couple ways you can interact with me. You've got the option to raise your hand, and then I'll contact you confidentially to address any issues you're having. And the other option is to type within the chat window, and I'll address that as well. We are going to be recording the session today, so we'll make this available to you in the next couple of days. And it will be up on our YouTube channel. That's where we post all of our webinars, our webinar recordings. So there may also be some other topics you want to take a look for. If you search for Integration New Media on YouTube, you'll find our channel. We've got another really great session on responsive web design that we did a couple months ago that may be of interest to you as well. And as a thank you for attending today, we're also going to be sending you out a copy of our new e-guide on the same topic, which gets into a little more depth on the content that we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to get started now, and if you have any questions, feel free to find as we go, and we'll address those at the end of the session. So over to you, Raluca. Ken?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction, and thank you again for making it to our session this morning. Kent and I are very excited to be presenting this content to you guys, and I really hope that you will find it useful. So to start off the session, I wanted to run through an agenda of the content that we'll be presenting. So I will be starting with an introduction of what is the dashboard and why an organization would want to implement one. We'll then move into the users and the context of use, and the main challenges of implementing a dashboard in large volumes of data. And Kent will be presenting the UI design of a dashboard, how to take your users from novice to experts, and how to build confidence and trust into your dashboard. So to start off, what is a dashboard? Let's look on dashboard design. Characterizes a dashboard by saying it's a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives considered at a glance. So basically, we're talking about a screen which summarizes a variety of data and allows the user to think immediately of charts and pie charts, graphs. A dashboard doesn't have to be this. It could simply be any type of summary data such as this, like simply numbers from different sources that I can interact with in different ways. I can drill down in the data, or I can take actions depending on this data. It all boils down to you can't manage what you don't measure. And as this Dogbert little cartoon illustrates, it's not only about measuring the data, but acting on the data that you're measuring. So to start, depending on the different goals of your organization and the goals of your dashboard, there's three broad types of dashboards that we have. We have strategic dashboards, which are typically used by CEOs. They offer an overview of the system health, so overall performance, very summarized data, broad objectives like market breakdowns, profit or losses. So these people want to know at large, how is the system doing? Then we have analytical dashboards. So these are used typically by VPs, like VPs of marketing. So there are people that are, again, in management, but they want to know more in-depth information. So they want to know summarized information again, but they want to have access to context in order to better understand this data, what causes it, and influence it. So they want to have, for instance, market demographics, department performance, employee performance, customer behavior. They want to know if they have different campaigns going on, which one is more successful than another. And finally, we have operational dashboards. So these are dashboards which monitoring, often 24/7 monitoring of data, and they have actionable information. So for instance, if I'm monitoring rainfall on a city, I'm going to be monitoring 24/7, and if I notice that the levels of rainfall go above a certain threshold, I will act upon it, so I will evacuate the city, for instance. What are the benefits that people seek in implementing a dashboard? First of all, is they try to increase productivity. So for sure, decision makers, they can focus on making reports and seeking the information that they need. Dashboards also help to reduce costs by optimizing the systems and resources for better efficiency. They lead also to faster reaction times. So people don't have to go and look for the data. It's easily accessible to them, and they can quickly understand trends and patterns in that. Dashboards also give the opportunity of having automated action. So when a data, for instance, reaches a certain threshold, this can run an automatically alert or an automatic workflow from that on. It also offers greater insight into KPIs. So it allows users to drill down into the information that they're looking at, to change range or to change context in order to burst. I mean, even just the fact that people don't have to retype the data, that it's being pulled from different sources automatically would reduce errors. However, if your dashboard is not usable, you won't be reaping any of the benefits that you're after. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if you look at the charts on the right side, they make information very difficult to read. So if the user can't read the information, again, he cannot use it. The user interface on the left, information very difficult to perceive, so I cannot tell from, or it's very difficult for me to tell each within the screen. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of information. So not all dashboards reap these benefits because they're not all easy to use. They don't make information scannable. So then how do we design a rich dashboard? Well, we at INM, we follow a process that is inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we try to basically link interface characteristics that are objective, such as my dashboard is functional, it works, to ones that are subjective, such as gratifying, it's insightful, it's fun to use, I like it. So in order to do this, we start building from the bottom of the pyramid up. So we first try to achieve a dashboard which is functional so that users can use it as intended. Then we try to build trust within the user so that he feels that the information that he perceives is reliable and that his actions will then on be confident. We try to build a dashboard then that is easy to use so that the user can use it without difficulty. And then we can lead to levels of higher user experience, such as building a dashboard which is intuitive, which predicts how the user thinks the dashboard will work and works as expected. And even better, that a dashboard that becomes insightful, that is gratifying to use, inspires the the user that exceeds basically his expectations. That is user-centric is we start by defining the users and their context of use. So here we leverage user personas. So there's something that is very commonly used in user experience in order to focus on the end users throughout the development process. So we use these personas in design, development, and testing to really validate all the decisions that we're taking. So a user persona, if you're not familiar with it, it's a detailed profile of a characteristic or a typical user, and it provides information such as the user's age, gender, education, context of use, motivation, needs, relevant experience, etc. So the goal of the user persona is to make sure that we understand the user's goals very well. So this is an example of a user persona that we've built for a previous project. You can see that it contains a lot of different types of information. The basic information that you want to include for sure is what is the context of use of the user, how often will he be using your application, what are his critical tasks, so what are his objectives in relation to this dashboard. And in order to reach those objectives, what data is he going to be looking for? And finally, does he have an existing process? So often we'll build a dashboard that will help a user improve a process that is already existing. So we want to understand how he is doing his job currently in order to make his job more efficient by adding a dashboard in the process. Typically from any project, we usually have 3 to 5 user personas, so we're not going to go ahead and build a persona for every single type of user out there. We're really trying to focus on the most typical user types. And we include names and pictures in order to make the representation of the user more real, so that we can refer to the user throughout the process. So we will ask, for instance, in our design process, what will Alain think of this decision? Will he like it? Is he going to think that this is intuitive? Is he going to appreciate the model that we're trying to build for him? Is he going to understand it? Intuitive, it has to predict correctly how the user thinks or expects that the interface will work and mimic this prediction. The other aspect that is critical to us building the dashboard on the right strategy is unexpected use. So this example here illustrates a context of use of an operational dashboard, which is used to monitor critical data 24/7. So what we want to know, for instance, is the interface used occasionally? If the interface is used occasionally from time to time, then we need to optimize memorability, so allowing the user to quickly recover proficiency after long periods of not using the system. On the other side, like in this example, if the dashboard is used to monitor data 24/7, we have to make sure that the dashboard will allow users to recover from mistakes, and that will be easy to read even at 3 a.m. after a long, tiring shift. So we come at one of the main challenges of designing a dashboard, which is taming the data, dealing with large volumes of information. As an anecdote, these Excel sheets of data that you see on screen right now were the actual starting ground for one of our projects. So this was part of the existing process of users dealing with data for one of the dashboards that we built. So what is the best practice here? Well, the best practice is to basically show relevant information on an as-needed basis and combine different types of data as needed to accommodate user limitations and avoid information overload. So in order to do this, we're going to start by defining the key performance indicators, or KPIs. So this will do in order to narrow down all the volume of information. we will work to respect user limitations. So if dashboards can really stress out the limitations of the users, we have to respond to this. And finally, we will use an appropriate range and scale, which is critical to giving the user the right perception and understanding of the data that he's viewing. The different data sources that you have access to, you need to extract the data that will actually help your user reach their goals, reach their critical tasks. And you need to make sure that these figures are the most prominent in your dashboard, that they're easiest to scan, that they're isolated and very clear. And what we do after we've defined, let's say, the KPIs, after we've distilled the information, is that we also link the particular KPIs to the specific workflow of the user. So what KPIs are linked to what critical tasks of the persona. So basically, in the last couple years, we all know technology has been advancing more. It's so quickly that we can make dashboards that are more and more powerful, and they're full of features. However, human limits, they're not quite advancing at such a high rate. Actually, they're not advancing. So how we perceive and understand information has stayed the same. So ultimately, we need to build technology that is more empathetic towards the user and understands and respects these user limitations. So your interface should basically anticipate these limitations and address them. So some of the most common human limitations that you will encounter when designing a dashboard are cognitive load, capacity of working memory, and change blindness. And these are the ones I'm going to be explaining a little bit more detail. So first of all is cognitive load. So this was the main problem with my example of don't do this, please don't do this from earlier, right? So cognitive load is the total amount of information that the brain is capable of understanding at the same time. So a dashboard, it's not only the data that takes up this cognitive load, but it's also the components of the interface, it's the navigation structure, all the things that the user has to remember and understand at the same time. So he needs to understand where he's at in the process on top of just understanding the data. So all these things take up his cognitive load. So in this case, feature-rich and information-rich dashboards make it very easy for users to feel overwhelmed. So what's the solution here? Well, one of the solutions is to layer information by using, for instance, progressive disclosure to show to the user only the data that he needs at this particular moment in time and allow him to drill down and access more information on an as-needed basis. So for instance, in this example here, I have a chart. I have different types of graphs showing me trends in data. So I can already have a certain level of understanding that, okay, this blue line here is going up. In this case, it's temperature, so my temperatures are rising. I can understand this. I can understand using a scale approximately what type of data I'm dealing with. And by interacting with the data, in this case, I'm doing a rollover over the data. I have tooltips that gives me precise information as to the amount of data that's available and the exact value. So progressive disclosure can be used as tooltips like you see here, but also click for more info or subsequent steps or subsequent screens. Another user limitation that you might encounter is the capacity of working memory. So human beings, we have three types of memory. We have long-term memory. That's what you use in order to remember your childhood. We have short-term memory. That's what you'll use in order to remember to pick up your kids after work, for instance. Hopefully you won't forget that. And then you have working memory, which is what you use in order to compare these numbers here on the left when trying to figure out which one is the smallest number. So basically, working memory is the type of memory that we use in order to understand data, so for comprehension and reasoning. So when I change the slides, you won't remember these numbers, and that's okay, because you won't store them in your short-term memory. They're only available in your working memory just long enough for you to understand them. So a lot of different theorists have defined working memory in different ways. But overall, the capacity of working memory is defined as 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. So it's important that this is a chunk of information for me. But if I would have, like, for instance, well, let's say words, well, a word could be also a chunk of information. A sentence could be a chunk of information. But what is important here to pay attention to is, in respecting basically the capacity of working memory, is that you need to limit the number of items that the user needs to compare to 7 plus or minus 2, which basically means 5 to 9 chunks of information. This doesn't mean that everything in your interface has to be 5 to 9 items. Not like your, I don't know, your navigational structure or your all buttons should be 5 to 9. It only means what the chunks of information that the user needs to compare or understand together. Okay? There's a lot of basically misconceptions, I think, regarding working memory, in part because all the different theorists, they define it differently and they sort of don't agree. The other thing is that our working memory capacity is influenced by what we're comparing. So for instance, we can remember less chunks when we're comparing longer words than when we compare shorter words. But a good, I guess, basis is at least to keep this in mind and try to identify how many chunks of information your user needs to compare at one point in time. So the other user limitation we need to be respectful of is change blindness. So change blindness is the process in which the human brain ignores something which should be very obvious. This happens because the mind basically fills in discrepancies when we don't expect to see something with basically what we expect to see. If you've never encountered change blindness, if you don't know what it is, I invite you to go on YouTube and search for change blindness tests. You'll find tons of very cute little tests that will illustrate it very clearly. So this is problematic in a dashboard because one of the most common goals in a dashboard is to identify changes in data. So if our brain fills in discrepancies and we don't notice them, this can be a very big problem. And for instance, people that monitor flights, for instance, like
air traffic control.
Like, yeah, air traffic controllers, they tend to be very affected by this. There's a lot of studies that have been run on how they are affected by change blindness and how they try to overcome this. They make conscious efforts in order to overcome this. But in your dashboard, you can't expect your users to make conscious efforts. You have to help them out a little bit. So one of the solutions is to isolate and emphasize changes in the data in order to make them easily scannable. Think also if you're able to summarize all the changes that happen in your interface in one area of the interface so that the user can easily go to that area if he's trying to view everything that has changed. The other thing that you can keep in mind is that change blindness is further, how do you say it? I'm trying to discourage them in your dashboard. So some of the things that amplify change blindness are, for instance, when users are focused on something very specific, when users are tired, for instance, after staring at a computer screen for a long period of time. Asking experts tend to suffer from change. Their expectations are much more set in stone. So this takes care of the user limitations that, the main user limitations that you'll encounter when designing a dashboard. Then we can move on to range. So range is very important. The appropriate range for your data with your client and your user. And this range will be very much related to what they're trying to perceive. So for instance, if the goal, then I cannot present total sales by month to my user. I have to present it in a quarterly time period. And there's also two types of options that are interesting to offer to users in relation range. So this pattern that you see here on screen has been made famous by Google Analytics, not Google Analytics, Google Finance, because it's very intuitive and it allows users to easily change the range of the data that they're viewing. This basically offers the user a new perspective, and it helps them identify trends and patterns in the data. The other option that you can give your users is the option to go back in time and view data as it was available at a certain moment in the past. So this is less common, but we find from our experience that it can be very interesting. And what this allows to do is that it allows supervisors to review the data and to compare it with actions that were taken at that moment in time in order to ensure that the appropriate actions were taken. So basically, it allows to reevaluate decisions, and it's essential for monitoring situations where a decision can have like significant consequences. Like going back to my previous example of monitoring rainfall in a city that can lead to flood and death in the city, etc. So on top of range, scale is also very important when presenting data in your dashboard. So the scale at which certain types of data are presented has a significant impact on the way in which data is interpreted. At a larger scale, it becomes harder to detect small short-term variations, while at smaller scales, it becomes more difficult to visualize large changes and like long-term trends. Scale also implicitly attaches a relative importance to variations in the data being presented. So more concretely, users will perceive small changes to be more important if the scale is small, and they will perceive these changes to be less important if the scale is big. So choosing the wrong scale for displaying your data can cause the user to be alarmed when there's no issue, or can cause a potentially serious situation to go unnoticed. So you have to think basically what is the difference in data that is significant to your user. Is he trying to perceive a difference in data of +1 unit, or is he trying to perceive a difference in data of +1,000 units? So just to illustrate this example, so right now in this example I'm seeing that, okay, I perceive something that is quite an important rise in my data, but when I change my scale a little bit, what I realize is that this rise is not so important in relation to the overall trend. Okay. So scale variations and data being presented, and that include both identifying long-term trends and small variations. So in that case, what you want to do is adjust the scale accordingly when the user range of the data perceived. So I'll pass it on to Kent now to go over the user interface design.
Thanks so much, Raluca. That was excellent. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to take you through the second half of the presentation, and that's going to include using thresholds to provide context to your data, choosing appropriate UI patterns, and then choosing a complementary visual design for your interface. So thresholds. What are thresholds? Well, they're preset values that could be based on historical data or prediction or an established norm. Depends on the context of the industry you're dealing with. And their primary objective is to help users evaluate the significance of the data they're observing. So it allows instant comparison of data with an established norm, or a max and min, for example. And it can automate processes or compel user action. And let me give you an example of what we're talking about here. You'll see the chart is to help the user understand how important are these variations. in relation to whatever task they are trying to perform. So what we can do to help the user in this context, for example, let's imagine that this is the level of levels in their area. So what we can do is attach a threshold that shows the average for from a previous year or a previous set of years. And we can see that, yes, during between March and April 2010, there was a spike. And so that's really high. But there's another level of threshold that we can add, which will help the user determine whether or not they need to take action. And so we can add a critical threshold here, which says, okay, nobody panic, or we haven't crossed this critical threshold yet, so it's okay. Real-world metaphors are used to represent data within the dashboards. The early dashboards had car dials and speed gauges, and you'll see that the interface or the UI pattern on the left is a current usage gauge, and it's been designed visually to mimic what an actual power reading gauge would look like on the side of a building. When designing a dashboard, this isn't necessarily the best way to present that information, because as you'll notice, it's very difficult to determine what the value actually is. It's not clear visually what the reading is. It's also not clear whether this is a high or a low number. The green ring around the interface, green ring around the gauge indicates kind of is misleading in a way, and it could mislead the user into believing that no matter where the energy level is along that gauge, it's okay. Green is associated with okay. So there's a lot of problems with this example on the left, and also on the right you'll see two more examples that mimic real-life gauges like a thermometer or some kind of like a physical range slider. And again, they offer very little context and they're very imprecise. They're hard to read. And at a quick glance, you really have no idea what the actual value is. You'll get a broad idea, but in a situation where you're monitoring critical data, like the energy level of, or some kind of energy consumption, which could have a dramatic impact on your operations, you really don't want to just guess broadly what these numbers are. You really need to know what they are specifically. And we gave it context. We changed the way it was displayed. We put it in context with a predictive value, and we also gave it, we placed it on a line over time so that the user at a glance can understand, okay, this value today is currently high relative to where it was earlier in the day. It's also about where it should be according to the predictions we've made. We've allowed the user as well to be able to change the day, week, or to view data on different. Also, you'll number the actual current number in the bottom left is very clear, 76,000. There's no mistake as to what that is. And also to the right, we've placed the value within context of, is this high or low compared to the average? So you'll see that right now it's very easy to understand that this data is getting a little bit high. So you'll see that we've taken this and didn't offer a lot of contextual information and presented it in a way that offers a very, very rich understanding of the data. So the best practice here is really to understand how your users interpret the data. This is critical. You have to go personas and ask, what are the critical tasks? What kind of meaning is the user trying to get out of the data that they're seeing? And that will dictate the appropriate UI pattern. Like, for example, is it important for them to be able to see the data in context of time, so in the past, throughout time, into the present, into the future? Or do they just need the value? And when you're designing a dashboard, space is critical. So these decisions can have enormous impact. If it's only important for them to see the number and they don't need context, then go with that, because you're going to be able to leave room for more important functions. So visual design is discussed in usability. It's basically the principle that someone is more likely to use a technology that looks good. And so often we'll spend a lot of time trying to make an interface look beautiful and look really make it pop, so to speak. But what's often overlooked is that the technology, while it can look amazing and look very impressive initially, if that visual design hampers the way the users actually execute their functions, it's going to be very frustrating and it will ultimately be abandoned in favor of something that's much easier to use. So this is really important to keep in mind when designing a dashboard and when applying a visual design, is that it needs to reinforce what is on the screen, reinforce the data. It should be minimal. It shouldn't distract from the data. It should communicate trust. It should also communicate the primary functions of what the dashboard is actually trying to accomplish. Other things to be aware of is cultural connotations of certain colors. In North America, we're used to red as being a warning and green as being everything is okay. This could change depending on the culture that you're designing for or different geographic areas. So keep that in mind. And also plan for users with color blindness, and because it affects up to 10% of men and less women, maybe half a percentage, but still, if you're designing something like a mission-critical application, you really don't want to put a user in a position where they're unable to differentiate good from bad at a glance because you've chosen a color that they can't distinguish from another color. And so it's important, a way to mitigate this is to always associate a color with a backup indicator like a number or a value, so that just in case they can't interpret that color correctly, they have the value to fall back on. So you'll see the example of Mint Finance here, and this is a bit of an older screenshot from their interface, but nonetheless, I think it's a great example because you have multiple elements here working together to really reinforce the dashboard and make it more usable. And so you'll see that the green color reinforces trust. It's linked with money and banking, which helps their brand as well, so that's like a double positive. They have green to indicate a positive color, a positive change, and a red to indicate a negative change, but they also have the value written as well. So it's easily scannable. Looking at this dashboard, I can quickly tell what's going up and what's going down, or what's positive and you're losing, more importantly, maybe. They've dedicated a color orange to indicate an alert. And as Raluca mentioned earlier, change blindness is something that is a really important issue that affects users of all sorts of different dashboards. And so you'll notice that how Mint has gone about addressing this problem is they've created an alerts in their interface and then assigned a color to the alert. So orange being the color of, hey, you have an alert, you have something that you need to take care of. So this helps to mitigate change blindness because it isolates all of the updates in one place on the interface. Something else to consider is to identify the user's needs and address those needs on base. Your user is going to have a different way of interacting with the system when they're a novice compared to when they're an expert. And it's really important that if you want to address, if you want to take care of it, if you want to really create an excellent dashboard, you need to build in features and functionality that address the needs of novice users, but also address the needs of expert users of the system. And people tend to be naturally motivated to learn new tools. On the left, we have an example of a feature that's available to a novice user that's create a profile. It notices that you're new, intuitively or automatically notices you're a new user, you're young Anakin, you don't really know what the force is, so it's offering you an option to try out a functionality that you may not know of yet. And then we have the example of Darth completely, and there is an options panel that's one layer deep into the interface. It allows you to start modifying values, to start start playing with the colors or start tweaking elements of the interface to really customize it and make it your own. And this is going to really help your users increase their productivity, and ultimately your dashboard will perform better as a result. And so another best practice for novice and expert users, or in dealing with novice and expert users, is to offer keyboard shortcuts. And if you've ever worked in technology, you know that the keyboard shortcuts are incredibly useful, but they're often overlooked. And so especially for repetitive actions, allowing expert users to save precious time, precious seconds, increase their efficiency is absolutely critical, especially when you're designing a dashboard. Keyboard shortcuts are an excellent way to give those expert users just a little bit of an extra edge and really encourage them to learn the system. So now I'll be talking about how to build confidence and trust. And the idea is to be as transparent as possible to the user. You should always understand why the system is behaving in a certain way. So the more trust there is between the user and the system, the more confident the user, they'll make less mistakes, and they'll be able to really leverage all the tools available to the system. Nothing more frustrating than wondering why your application isn't working or why it's not behaving in a way that you expect it to behave. So you can think of a user and a system interacting in the same way, much like a conversation. So the dialogue is the interchange between the user's input and the system's output. So you really want to build this conversation between the user and the dashboard. Feedback and leading users to confident action. So I'll go over those now in a little more detail. Communicating with the user. Delivering the right feedback to users at the right time is an important part of establishing trust for the decision. And here we have Season 1, A Space Odyssey. And if you haven't seen the movie, basically HAL builds confidence and trust with the protagonist of the movie throughout the entire movie by constantly offering reassuring status updates, providing feedback to the main character, Dave, and advising him on possible courses of action. So we have a situation where there's this interchange between the user and the system. Dave can communicate with users and build trust and empathy. So always indicate the status of the system, including the time of the last update. So this is a great way to build trust. And here we have an example of a simple status update. We've logged in, we're Kevin, we're checking out the system, and immediately we know whether it's online or offline, because there's a little red circle that indicates, oh, we're not receiving data. Or if it were green, for example, then we'd be receiving data. Another example of this, a more complex example, you have 4 different sources of information here, and you can see very quickly that one of these sources of information is not receiving data while the rest are. So it's a great way to communicate to the user, and it'll be able to, it'll improve their understanding of what's happening in the system, why maybe one chart is not working, or why one data source seems to be blank. They can quickly understand why. Well, you have a ribbon system that presents messages from the system constantly. You have the time the system is updated, but also because it's a more complex example, the users really in this context, this is the project we worked on, needed to be able to go back and view a historic of all of the system messages that were pushed through, so they can expand this area, and then they can go back through time, and they can identify system changes and updates that may have affected the outcome or affected data that were perceived. Basically, providing action-oriented alerts that show the change in data and guide users towards a decision. So examples of alerts are basically, this is an example. You didn't fill out the area, and it's really important that you do. And then it's providing the context of, okay, no, I can cancel, or I can move forward and I can go ahead anyways. But at least what the system does is it provides the ability for the system to provide a warning to the user and say, okay, you know, you're about to take this action, or are you sure you want to do this? And this is a good way to build trust. And alerts should always suggest appropriate actions and offer a way to cancel as well. Confident actions. So now your users have easy access to the critical data they need. So you need to make the next action obvious, simplify the complex tasks, break tasks into steps, provide confirmations of successfully completed actions, give an overview of the next course of action, and let users recover from mistakes. This is really, really critical. So here's an example of a screen in which sort of addresses these issues. You have confirmation of successfully completed actions up here. You see the big check marks indicating that the user has completed these actions and they were successful. We have a long process flow, so we've broken it into several steps. The user is always aware of where they are in this process, and they can navigate freely between the steps to complete them in the order that they choose. Letting the users recover from mistakes is critical. You have a clearly marked back button, allows them to do that, and make the next action obvious. It's clear when you click on next step, it's going to take you to the next step. You can even save a draft, and you can also cancel the entire process. Ensuring the success of your dashboard. There's a couple of really important points to go over in regards to ensuring that your dashboard is successful after you deploy it. And it's important to take into consideration that the development and design doesn't necessarily end with the deployment. If you monitor data and user actions and subsequent outcomes, can help you optimize your dashboard in future releases. And so it's important to have a strong set of analytics and to observe the way your users interact with the system, maybe what is the most commonly searched terms if you have a search box, what areas of the interface are being used and what areas are not, and really to monitor this data and then apply it into the future. You can get very, very into the way that the users are really using the application, and you can apply that to designs in the future. So if you design for the context of use and you leverage UI patterns, optimize visual design, and importantly communicate effectively with the user, you can create a meaningful experience, and your dashboard will be, hopefully, a great success. So I'll give it back to Raluca, and she can go over
Thank you, guys.
a little bit. No problem.
So just very quickly, I know we have several questions here. So about INM, we build engaging digital solutions. We focus on delivering results. We've been in business for over 22 years. We have clients across the globe, and we're a team of developers, UX designers, graphic designers, integrators, project managers, etc. And our mission statement is not a document that spans 400 lines. It's a triangle, and it's basically a triangle that tries to balance user experience with also business objectives and solid engineering. And a little bit about our services. We do obviously user interface design. We also do mobile development, mobile apps, web development, and rich internet apps, which most of the dashboard examples that you've seen today come from. And the next step, well, following this webinar, we will be sending you a copy of our e-guide, which contains more in-depth detailed information. And it also contains extra topics that we haven't covered today, such as optimizing your entry points for your dashboard, dashboard layout, information, our YouTube channel. So we will send you an URL in the follow-up email. And you can, if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us directly by email or by phone. It will be our pleasure to discuss this with you. As you can probably tell, we're very passionate about user experience.
I think that definitely comes through in the presentation today, guys. It was an excellent session. We've got a lot up, so I'm not sure if we will get information, so we follow up with you individually with the answer if that's the case. But I'll start with some of the questions we have because we've got some great ones. The first question we had was from Dan. He had asked me, can you explain the difference between interaction design and visual design?
Okay, so I think interaction design is, or really basically what the interface will look like. So the color, of the interface, whether there is a gradient aspect of the interface. Whereas the interaction design is how we plan how the user will interact with the data there. So for instance, can he drill down in the data, right? Like we had an example of a data pattern at some point where the user was able to, let me find it very quickly. Well, even here, like let's say here the user can change the range of the data that he's viewing. So this is interaction design. We plan this into the system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview. The other question I have is, should you have a setting where the user can select between novice and advanced view? You know, you were talking about the two different user types and designing for those users. How do you address that on screen?
Well, it really depends on the context. I mean, having if I understood your question correctly, like being able to just press one button that switches from novice to expert, is probably what you want to do if you really want to design an interface that's intuitive and that's really meaningful. You have to make these kind of levels as seamless as possible. So what ideally, in an ideal situation, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do something like that, but ideally if you can, what you want to try to do is make it clear when the user is first starting out in an interface. If a user is a novice, they should still have access. They need to access should be put into focus. So it goes back to the example we showed with Anakin and Darth Vader. The system knows that if you're logging in for the first time, it's going to show a pop-up bubble. It's going to say, you know, hey, you haven't done this yet. Please, you know, check it out. So it's offering this new functionality to a novice user. As you progress and get more experienced with the system, it's no longer going to offer you those options because the system can keep track of what you've used and what you haven't. So this becomes more of a seamless progression where, okay, we stop throwing little tips at you as you get better and better with the system, and then you're free to explore, and as you explore, you'll discover that in the options setting, you really start to play around with more advanced features. So I think it's a little bit more complex than just offering an advanced and a basic. I think you really want to try to make it seem like as the user gets better, they're discovering more and more and more, and this will make it seem like a much better, because I feel like they've maxed out. I think that's sort of what you have to keep in mind when you're designing.
What are your thoughts on the use of icons instead of text? So when is it okay to replace text with an icon?
I think it's okay to replace text with an icon only when the icon is very clear and when it basically doesn't require text. So if I have I don't know, for instance, my icon here, like +1 user in this screen, I need to have the text of manage profiles next to it because it has to be clear to the user at all times what will happen when he clicks a button or interacts with a certain element. So maybe in case of weather, it would have been clear enough, but it also depends on the rest of the icons that I have on my, here it's a piece of a navigation bar. So if because the other icons will not be clear, well then I need to add a label for this one as well. But I think you're better safe than sorry in that case. If your user is looking for a certain feature and he can't find it because he doesn't understand what that that icon is, you're better off having a label than no label at all.
And if you do decide, like, you know, for whatever reason, there's external constraints that sometimes we're not always in control of. So sometimes you'll end up in a situation where you have to use an icon. Well, a quick way to validate whether the user can really comprehend that is to run some tests, get some users in, and put them in an environment. You only really need maybe 5 or 6 people to do a really quick test, and set something up whereby they can ask them to identify these areas that are represented by an icon. And you'll get an idea, a very quick idea, as to whether these people, whether users will understand, you know, the icon or not, or whether they need supplemental information.
Yeah, and if your interface is on screen as well, you could use tooltips for your label if you don't have a label for a certain icon.
That's funny. That's a question I just got as a clarification while you were answering.
Tooltips for sure information. When you're often space is really an issue on a dashboard, like tooltips will be your best friend.
Yeah, because users intuitively hover over elements that they're currently looking at or they're interested in.
Excellent. On the dashboard, have some sort of mouse interaction, whether it's click to expand view, click link for more info, or a mouse over for a tooltip.
No, only when it's relevant. If action dashboard, but if your data is not actionable at all, that you can't provide any extra information, you can't provide context, you can't allow users to change settings such as range or scale, then it's better that
you might also end up in a situation where in a dashboard, again, because space is such an issue, if you have a tooltip or a hover or an interaction for every single element, everything is going to be constantly flashing and changing on the screen as the user just moves the mouse around.
Yeah.
And you really want to limit that, because that's going to, not only is it going to be distracting, but eventually the user is just going to start ignoring it, and that's even worse. So it's actually really important to be selective as to what you decide to offer as a secondary layer like a tooltip, because otherwise you're going to have a situation where everything is popping or flashing or changing color, and then the user is just going to normalize that in their brain. So every time they use the interface, they're not going to notice those changes anymore after prolonged use. So you have to really be what you choose.
Okay. So we have a couple more questions here. What tools other than Excel do you use for building dashboards? Was the question. So I guess maybe that the clarification would be, you know, Excel is often the source of data or the source of a pre-state on a dashboard. It might be interesting to share, you know, what the sources of data are as well as the tools to build the dashboard.
I mean, sources of data, it can depend very greatly on what the context of the application is. To give you some examples, like the dashboards that you see here, like examples from our previous project, the one on the right is a dashboard used for monitoring rainflow, and it's a dashboard built using Adobe Flex technology. So it pulls in data, so its sources are on-the-field technology, rain monitors, river flow monitors. So it pulls data from on the field and it displays it in a Flex interface. Whereas the dashboard on the left side is a dashboard used for energy company consumption from different plants, and also price information like the cost of energy at a certain moment in time. And the dashboard is built using Silverlight and also CSS, basically JavaScript.
JavaScript, yeah.
So basically it's a web interface, like a website.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and I had one more question to squeeze in. The question was, let's just go back to my notes here. Do you find that letting a user customize the dashboard, users would really take the initiative to customize the dashboard?
I think that's an excellent question. Well, like Kent explained before, users only look for personalization or to customize their dashboard when they become very accustomed to the interface and when they've become experts. So if your dashboard right off the bat is an interface that they will only use from time to time, they might not ever reach this level of expert user where their expectations will change. So you need to think, first of all, will your users be expecting personalization? And if they don't, then you don't need to provide it. If they do expect it because they become experts and they do want to modify a couple things, then you can provide with the features of customizing their dashboard for better efficiency, because in the end they're your expert users and they will be able to make the system more efficient and grow it. However, you have to set certain boundaries for them. So we've seen that in dashboards that are widget-based, like your Google homepage, or even like this dashboard that we had on the list. So we want, in widget-based dashboards, we want to encourage users to personalize in a profound way. However, we have to set limits for them in order to allow them to not destroy basically the interface and make something that without them realizing will change their perception of the data and will in a negative way. They won't understand it anymore, or it will become too difficult to use. So you have to set certain boundaries in what you allow your users to change. So for instance, here I allow my user to change, I don't know, the color of certain charts. Well, I'm not going to allow him to make charts transparent. This is an irrelevant kind of option.
But certainly, I think there's maybe one or two more questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to, but we'll definitely address those individually. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming to the session today. As we mentioned at the beginning, we will post this on YouTube, and we'll make this available. As well, we'll send you out a copy of the e-guide, which has a lot more information in it in terms of best practices and certain challenges. So please feel free to reach out to us personally if you have any information. And we're going to just put the screen up with our contact info. So Raluca and Kent are both here to answer questions if you have any. And we certainly thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.